The second volume is called The Life of Greece. And in this volume, in the preface, Durant has two goals. First, to establish the relevance of ancient Greece for the modern world, and secondly, to outline the various topics that are covered in this book. And today we're going to review the preface to Volume 2. Hello and welcome back to What's Past This Prologue. My name is Daniel and this is the channel where we talk about the story of civilization by Will and Ariel Durant. Today we're going to start the second volume. I'm still working on videos for the first volume, of course, but I thought I would start some of the other volumes anyway because I like the idea of working my way through different volumes at the same time. And so today we're looking at the preface to Volume 2, and Durant starts by talking about how ancient Greece is still relevant for the modern world, and I'm going to read you a quote now from the preface. This is what our author has to say. Excepting machinery, there is hardly anything secular in our culture that does not come from Greece. Schools, gymnasiums, arithmetic, geometry, history, rhetoric, physics, biology, anatomy, hygiene, therapy, cosmetics, poetry, music, tragedy, comedy, philosophy, theology, agnosticism, skepticism, stoicism, Epicureanism, ethics, politics, idealism, philanthropy, cynicism, tyranny, plutocracy, democracy. These are all Greek words for cultural forms, seldom originated, but in many cases first matured, for good or evil, by the abounding energy of the Greeks. What you get from this quote is the sense of the sheer variety of different subjects that the ancient Greeks were interested in. It also demonstrates the power that the Greek language has had on the English language, particularly in the fields of science, philosophy, and mathematics. It's estimated that somewhere between 5 and 10% of all the words in the English language originate from Greek. If we go back to the quote, there are a couple of things worth noticing. First, note the use of the word secular. This is Durant distinguishing between Greece's influence over the secular as opposed to religious parts of the modern world. This is because none of the three major monotheistic religions originated in ancient Greece. That's not to say that ancient Greece didn't influence the modern monotheistic religions. It's just that its influence was more subtle and indirect. Examples of the subtle and indirect ways in which ancient Greece has influenced Christianity come in the form of ideas. So things like the unmoved mover, or the Platonic forms, or the division between the body and the soul. These are ideas that were debated by the likes of Aristotle and Plato, and then they were later both adopted and adapted into Christianity. Another example of this is the parallels that are often drawn between Dionysus and Christ, particularly in the form of their death and resurrection. Some people have suggested that early Christians may have been influenced by Greek mythology, although this is speculative. Greece's influence over the major monotheistic religions was not limited to Christianity. It also affected Judaism. This is particularly true during the Hellenistic period. So we're talking about from 323 BC at the death of Alexander all the way to 31 BC and the Battle of Actium. During that period, there was a rather fractious debate about whether or not Judaism could be or should be Hellenized. This was particularly relevant in terms of the way people lived their lives, their lifestyles, their religious practices, and their philosophical views. Some adopted a more Greek way of thinking about things, and others resisted that. This, of course, ultimately culminated in the Maccabean Revolt in 167 BC, which was multi-causal, although one of the largest causes, was a rejection of the Hellenization of Judaism that had been taking place under the Seleucid Empire. A larger influence was probably linguistic. During this period, Greek became the dominant language of the Eastern Mediterranean. The Septuagint, the Bible of the 70, was also written during this period, and it translated the Old Testament into Koine Greek. There are subtle differences in the way in which we can understand concepts when using different languages. So translations are never quite word for word. Judaism would have been different via Hebrew than it is via Greek. All of this is to say that Durant, at this stage of the book, in the preface, simply wants to separate out Greece's influence on the secular world as opposed to the religious influence it may have had. There is a second part of this quote which I find very interesting, and if you want to try and guess what that is, I would say pause the video now and try and figure it out. Okay, so the second part of the quote that I find very interesting is the phrase seldom originated. This is an absolutely crucial point that Durant is making, and I think it's a mistake that a lot of people make. And that is to say that of the cultural forms that he's talking about there, so schools and gymnasiums and arithmetic, things like this, most of those cultural forms did not originate in ancient Greece. They come from elsewhere, usually from Mesopotamia. Of those three that I mentioned there, schools, gymnasiums, and arithmetic, only gymnasiums originated in ancient Greece. The others came from elsewhere. But what happened was that the Greeks developed these ideas to such a large extent that people often assume that they must have originated the ideas. And that's, for the most part, not true. There is a tendency in the modern world to exaggerate and romanticize the importance of people making initial breakthroughs or geniuses or innovators or visionaries. Of course, ancient Greece had plenty of those, but it also had, in some ways more importantly, people that were taking ideas and then developing them to a higher stage. This is often much harder and more important work. There is, in fact, a kind of fine line between the origination of and the development of ideas. Both can be very creative processes. For example, geometry existed before Euclid, biology existed before Aristotle, and astronomy existed before Ptolemy. But these fields were developed to such a great extent by the ancient Greeks that people often assume that those fields must have originated in ancient Greece, but that's not the case. Continuing on in the preface, Durant says this: all the problems that disturb us today, the cutting down of forests and the erosion of the soil, the emancipation of women and the limitations of the family, the conservatism of the established and the experimentalism of the unplaced in morals, music and government, the corruptions of politics and the perversions of conduct, the conflict of religion and science, and the weakening of the supernatural supports of morality, the war of the classes, the nations, and the continents, the revolutions of the poor against the economically powerful rich, and of the rich against the politically powerful poor, the struggle between democracy and dictatorship, between individualism and communism, between the East and the West. All these agitated, as if for our instruction, the brilliant and turbulent life of ancient Hellas. There is nothing in Greek civilization that does not illuminate our own. 85 years after he published this volume, every single one of the topics that he mentioned in that quote are still relevant today. Some of them may well be fundamental problems of human nature, so conservatism and experimentalism may well be fundamental psychological predispositions about which we can do very little. It's hard to imagine a society without class conflict. But others are more practical problems that we could, if we were a little bit wiser, probably solve. So the chopping down of the forests and the erosion of the soil, these are not fundamental problems that are necessities for civilization, but rather they're choices that we make, and we could make different choices if we were a little bit wiser. One question we might ask, though, is why does it matter? Why is it important if ancient Greece, or in fact any other historical period, still has any kind of contemporary relevance? Well, it mattered to Durant not just because he wanted you to read the book, and in fact his publisher wanted you to buy the book, but because he thought that if there were any lessons in history, we should try to learn them. Hence the section in the quote that says, as if for our instruction. Regardless, it's still a question worth thinking about. Let us suppose that the opposite were true. Let us suppose that ancient Greece were a society that was completely irrelevant to the modern world, that it was a society so alien to ourselves that we couldn't find any way of relating it to our modern concerns or sensibilities. Would that make ancient Greece less or more interesting? For myself, I do wonder whether this desire to make every historical period somehow relevant to the modern world, I do wonder whether this is a sign of modern narcissism. Why does everything have to be about us? Why can't it just be about them? If something is interesting, then surely that's enough. Knowledge is its own reward. There's a couple of other things I wanted to talk about with regards to the preface. So with the first line, Durant states his aim with the book, and he says this: my purpose is to record and contemplate the origin, growth, maturity, and decline of Greek civilization from the oldest remains of Crete and Troy to the conquest of Greece by Rome. If you've read the preface to the first volume, then one of the things that you will notice straight away is that this volume is not called Our Classical Heritage. What happened, of course, was that Durant had too much material, so he separated out Greece and Rome, so they became Volume 2 and Volume 3. He doesn't mention that he changed his plan in this volume, he doesn't mention that at all. If you're interested in what Durant's original plan was and how it changed, I did talk about that in the video I made for the preface to Volume 1. So if you want to find out about how that plan changed, I'd say go back and watch that video. So does ancient Greece deserve its own volume? The answer to that is yes, an unequivocal yes. But then again, so did China, India, Japan, and Egypt. But he tried to cram all of those into one volume. My guess is that Durant probably later regretted that. But as the series went on, it expanded, and this is welcome. But what it does is it leaves the series somewhat lopsided. There's a lot of talk about North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, and not nearly enough talk about Asia. One wonders if he had more time whether he would have gone back and rewritten the first volume and turned it into 3 or 4 volumes, separating out Egypt and China and Japan and India. But we'll never know. Another thing to say about this second volume is that volume 2, as well as volume 3 and 5, are actually very different than the other volumes in the series in the sense that they're much more self-contained. So volume 2 goes from ancient Crete to the Roman takeover of Greece, and volume 3 goes from the Etruscans to Constantine, and volume 5 goes from the birth of Petrarch to the death of Titian. So they're both much more contained geographically as well as thematically. The other volumes, of course, roam much more widely geographically, and so this has both advantages and disadvantages. So if you're trying to come up with underlying narratives or an underlying theme, that's more difficult when you're going at one point from England to France to Spain to Poland to Greece, and you're sort of all over Europe. It's very difficult to come up with any underlying themes because every civilization, every part of Europe is very different from every other part of Europe. Whereas if you're just contained in one place, in one location, focusing on one type of civilization, you can try and come up with narratives that work, kind of rise and fall of civilization kind of narrative or an underlying theme. But some people would argue that themes and narratives are actually a way of simplifying history in a way that's misleading. So there are pros and cons to that. One day I'll probably make a video where I rank all of the 11 volumes and talk about which is my favorite and which is my least favorite. The title of this volume gives you a sense of what it's about. So I'm going to read you the full title, okay? The Story of Civilization, Volume 2, The Life of Greece, a history of Greek government, industry, manners, morals, religion, philosophy, science, literature, and art, from the earliest times to the Roman conquest. And in the preface to this volume, Durant outlines in more detail some of the subjects that are going to be covered here. But rather than go through the list, I thought it would be better to just make a kind of visual montage of all of the different subjects. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. The next video is going to be on the first section to this volume, which is going to be about the Mediterranean, more specifically about the Aegean. And so that's section 1 of chapter 1 of volume 2. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you later. Bye.